me. I hope you all are doing well. I want to do a quick live with everybody on the topic of Indian international students coming to Canada. It's a topic that I've been exploring a lot. And again, as I've said before, I feel like I'm in this unique position where I can talk about these topics in a very open way. Maybe it's because I'm brown, and maybe it's because I'm the son of economic immigrants. But the reality is there's this massive demographic shift happening, and it's causing effects in our society, specifically when it comes to jobs and housing. And if we don't openly talk about this as a country, as us, as community members living and working in our biggest cities, we're going to develop enclaves in our society that are more extreme in their approach to immigration and immigrants as a whole. And we need to talk about this so that we can hash out some of the challenges that are happening. And so I'm really hoping that the YouTube videos that I've uploaded, the comments, I read all of them, are places where we can engage again in more engaging conversation. Because I don't think our media is doing a good job, if a job at all, and our government isn't either. And so this provides myself and yourself an opportunity to talk about this in as open, as respectful way as possible. And when I started doing the research for this, it's pretty wild. Like, it is pretty wild what the government's doing and how it's doing it. Um, the first thing is when I started learning, like where is all of this coming from? Why would the government do this in the first place? A lot of research like positions this back to the 2008 financial crisis, and coming out of that, how much students were post-secondary was looked at as discretionary spending. So coming out of the crisis, the financial crisis, governments cut discretionary spending, which included post-secondary, which is so wild. So post-secondary got pretty big cuts from different G7 countries. But what countries found was that being G7 had this like allure, had this reputation for the global south. So if they could have a steady stream of international students come in, they didn't need to invest as much into post-secondary because international students paid 4 or 5 times tuition. So governments were happy to offload that responsibility to international students, and universities were happy that their international student uh, quota or threshold was going up because that meant more money, more revenue for their institutions. And this is wild because you think about some of the biggest universities in Canada, McGill, U of T, UBC, and you're like, what would these institutions be without international students? Would they even exist? Oops, that's my watch. Would they even exist in the way that they exist? I should take my watch off. But would they even exist in the way that they exist today? Right? Like, would U of T have this gorgeous campus in like prime real estate downtown Toronto had it not been for the influx of international students? And so that helps understand the why. But the government took it so far, starting with in 2014 Harper and like the strategy to get more international students. It was solely an economic play, right? You bring them in, they pay more on tuition, and everybody benefits. And Harper had like very aggressive targets from 2014 onwards. But I'll get to this in my next video. Shameless plug for my next video. But Trudeau really amplified that. And I don't want to give too much away, so I want you all to tune in on Tuesday when I drop my next video. But the changes Trudeau made were so unlike any other country in the world. And so I think it's really important that we, just remind ourselves that Canada, we're very accepting, we're very open to all walks of life coming here and building this country and making it what it is. That is Canada. Um, I think the pain point we're seeing is a few. The influx, the numbers are just astronomical. I think anyone can see that. But it's actually astronomical. Like when you look at the data, the numbers are astronomical. And that's one. So why are we suddenly letting in so many? That's the question I think is on everyone's minds that many are afraid to ask and answer. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know why the government pivoted so much to temporary foreign workers and Indian international students. I'm trying to understand more, and I'm still perplexed. Some research says that we have to stay competitive and we have to compete with other countries, et cetera. And to an extent, I get that. But it's just the level of international students, the level of temporary foreign workers is literally unprecedented. I believe it was 2022 when we let in 1 million I think it was 1 million temporary foreign workers, international students, like basically if you combine everything, it was like 1 million. It was crazy. And I was like, what the heck? Like, it's never been the case in Canada where those numbers hit. And we haven't hit that number since. I think 2022 was the max. Now, one could argue it's the glut of 2020 and the pandemic, and our numbers went really down 2020, and so maybe it was catching back up. But 2023 and 2024 have remained pretty high as well. So, part of me wonders, like, was COVID like a catalyst for all of this as well to kind of get, more more people in and justify it? Who knows? But there's definitely a lot that, again, I could spend a lot more um, time on, and I'm going to. Like, I truly am going to, because I think it's something that we all need to be talking about, and like just being more like open and like talking to people, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's very important, because I think it just helps us all understand a little bit more about what it is that our governments are trying to accomplish. And again, I have no idea what they're trying to accomplish with this. Um, the other thing that I want to mention too is the influx is a big issue that many Canadians are concerned about. I think the other thing that Canadians have told me so often is the hiring practices. And this is something I'm going to keep exploring. This one's a bit tricky because, excuse me, there's not enough data for me to really robustly talk about it with authority other than what people are telling me they're experiencing. And maybe that's the angle I use so that I make sure that I'm doing them justice too. But basically, a lot of people are saying the same thing. They're going to the Tim Hortons, they're going to fast food, they're going wherever, and they can't get a call back, which is crazy. Young Canadians are not getting callbacks. Um, the unemployment rate for 18 to 24-year-olds in Canada is 14.6%. To put that in perspective, we have not seen that kind of unemployment since 2010, and that was shortly after the economic recession. So we are in uncharted territory here when it comes to young people. And naturally, people are saying, well, how come it is the case that international students come here and their unemployment seems to be at or near zero? And I'm going to pause there because I think it's important that we recognize that as well. I personally have not seen international students unemployed or maybe they're underemployed, but I haven't seen them unemployed. That's something that we should be talking about. And then layered on top of that is many people telling me, Christopher, like, I was told that I can't speak the language, so don't even apply. Like, this is madness. This is absolute madness. This should not be happening in Canada. But it is. It is, because you're telling me this and I'm hearing it from multiple people who are out there looking for work and they simply can't find it. And that is something that I think the government needs to really look into: the fraudulent practices, the unfair hiring practices, the Canadians that are trying to get by in this economy. And let me tell you something. I went to the mall the other day, Eaton Center, and the prices are just out of this world. Out of this world. I don't know how Canadians are doing it. I don't know. I have no idea. A buddy of mine and I were talking, and like he's a bartender, and he was telling me like, you want to go out, you want to get pretty tipsy at a bar downtown. It's like minimum spend is 400 to 500 bucks, and that's Ubers and buying drinks for your pals and ordering food, and like it's a whole thing, but it's so expensive, and so it's like, how are people doing this? How are people doing this? And so, of course, Canadians are looking for work. Of course, they're looking for side hustles and jobs. And, I think when Canadians see that their kid applied to Tim Hortons or a fast food place and they're they haven't gotten a call back, and then the next day their kid goes to that place and it's all staffed by temporary foreign workers, Indian international students, they're like, what the heck's going on here? How come I didn't get a call back? Or some people get a call back and they're like, you don't speak the language. Like, I can't believe people have told me this. They've told me literally that that was their experience, that people literally told them, like, you don't speak the language. Like, please, if you have this experience, let me know in the comments below. I mean, this is just wild and it's just madness. So, something for us as Canadians, and again, to keep talking about. And like, I want us to be talking about this. And so in the chat, I'll drop a question. Who do you think really benefits from the international student boom in Canada? I mean, it's wild, right? Because like Canadians, I don't think are aware of all the stuff that's happening right now. And it's just, to me, it's just wild that this is happening and that it's happening quite fast. And again, like I said, our societies are changing. They're changing. Our communities are changing. People tell me all the time that, like, their community, that house that had was for one family, has in it's all rooming houses for international students. So the government policy, while it might have been well intentioned, it has like the rippling out effects into our society, right? Jobs. Like, governments have a hard time creating jobs. So if they have a hard time creating jobs and Indian international students are coming en masse and those students are not getting jobs, then this whole kind of system doesn't function, right? Like, what would the allure be for kids coming from across the world to Canada if they can't even find a job? So that lends itself, and I don't want to assume this without research and data to back it up. But are employers given certain benefits for hiring temporary foreign workers, Indian international students? Many of you have told me, like, you have experienced it where there's preferential treatment. Maybe they get paid under the table. Like, I know a lot of this stuff is like very colloquial and like it's a lot of hearsay. I don't want to say that it's like, actually the thing, right? But I think that there is something that's really going on. Rachel says in the chat, hey Rachel, hope you're doing well. The global elites benefit. They get more workers and consumers. Landlords with multiple properties win too. Very interesting, Rachel. Average Canadians lose. It costs us our healthcare system, wages being pushed down, etc. Good comment, Rachel. Let me just say to everybody um, that, like, I want us to explore this, like, honestly and openly, because something's going on. Like, something clearly is going on. Like, there has to be something going on because this just doesn't make sense, right? So Rachel raises a point of landlords with multiple properties win too. So if you are a landlord and you're struggling to rent out your property, maybe it's close to a Canadian university, um, maybe it's a single family, you turn into a duplex or a triplex, whatever it is. Like, I'm just thinking like from an investor lens, right? So if I'm a mayor of a small town and Christopher comes and he's got money to spend on 3 4 properties in my community, and it's a university town, and he can't find renters, he's going to be like, I don't want to come back here because I couldn't find anybody. So maybe the onus shifts to the government to find Christopher tenants for his properties. Like, I'm trying to unpack Rachel's point here a little bit to pose that as a scenario where we can now start seeing broader government involvement in an otherwise like transactional investment opportunity task. If you buy an investment property, you rent it out, you put the ad on Kijiji or whatever, Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, and you go through the resumes or whatever, and you do your own due diligence. But to Rachel's point, maybe there's something going on where landlords are having the steady stream of international students come in and their places are constantly being rented out. I don't know that for a fact, but again, I just want to kind of play a scenario out there for you so that you can kind of pause and ponder on it. And as I mentioned earlier, like, the number of international students is something we should all be concerned about. The number of temporary foreign workers. Many of you, again, jobs. Like, I know I said, like, so many of you have told me that you have felt displaced. Oops. Sorry if I did something there. I might have. Um, but many of you have said that you felt displaced as a result. Like, people are not like, um, uh, you can't get jobs, your kids can't get jobs, etc. But I'd love to know from you, and maybe I'll drop this in the chat. Like, have you felt displaced um, from the job market as a result of the influx of international students and TFWs? Let me know in the chat. Just another thing for us to get the conversation going. I think it's so important for us to be talking about that. Because so many of you have told me, like, you felt displaced. You felt like something's going on. And again, I want to do this respectfully. Being a brown man who grew up in Canada, like, I feel like I can talk about this because so many people have these thoughts, but they're terrified to talk about it. So again, drop something in the chat. And just need a sip of my electrolyte drink here. Because a lot's happening. I mentioned before, like, I struggle with understanding like what's going on because I do think there's a broader strategy at place here. Again, it started in 2014 with the bringing in of international students. The other thing I think we should all be talking about, I know a lot of you have asked me, like, why India? Like, why is it that India, and not only why India, but why specific regions within India are coming with young people to Canada? So to answer that question, um, I did some digging on this, and it turns out a few things. Right now, I still don't know fully, but I'm hoping that this will help contextualize things. So India has this massive booming youth population, 18 to 24, I think. 2001, there were 300 million. 2021, 420 million. Like, just a massive, massive, the largest growing young population in the world is in India. So that's a massive thing, right? So like 420 million, that's 10 times the size of Canada just in their youth population. So they have this glut of young people in India. And from what I've been able to decipher, it doesn't take much research to figure this out, but India does have institutions like really good IT and business schools. Like IIT, India Institute for Tech, is like one of the top rated IT schools in the world, right? But from what students say and young people, it's like it's very hierarchical, it's a very bureaucratic. There's still like male female stigma, a lot of nepotism in hiring practices. Like, there's a lot of corruption still. And this forces millions of students onto the sidelines. So, we always talk about corruption in countries, and they're very low population countries, right? But when we're talking about India with like hundreds of millions of kids, if we're saying that only a few million get to like the most prestigious universities, or even a few 100,000, that leaves like hundreds of millions of students left on the sidelines that can't access these echelons of power. And so school becomes like, now kids are looking externally for school. And so they look to the UK, they look to the US. they look to countries with large diasporas already. And so what we see is, and this is where it gets wild. It's something that I've found in the research, and I'm sure all credit sometimes to our mainstream media. The CBC has done some pretty good exposés on this, and so I'd love to know from you what you think. I'll pause there. I see Rachel commented. If you have folks, if you have comments, questions, hit that like button, subscribe, folks. Before I continue, my name is Christopher Belkrin. I'm sure you know that from the live, but I'm here to have these open and honest conversations. We need it in Canada more than anywhere else in the world. We need it in Canada. You might be asking why, and it's because I have this undying belief in Canada and what it can be. And I'm scared of what has happened in the past. And I think it all stems from us as Canadians not having enough open conversations. I'm going to pause on why India in a second. Let me read Rachel's comment. Rachel says, it's also scary to think that it is planned decline. Young men outweighing women in Western countries also makes me think it's bodies for World War III. Oof, that's a scary, scary thought, Rachel, but one that it sadly makes a lot of sense. I don't know the demographics, but just based on what I've seen here in Toronto. Also, folks, I do live in Toronto as well. So if you are in Toronto, let me know. Maybe we could do a Christopher Balkrin meetup with people. But um, there is a disproportionate number of men versus women of international students. I've seen it. I'm sure many of you have seen it. Um, yeah, it is pretty wild. It's a kind of dystopian thought there, Rachel, but oh, I I kind of see it. I kind of see what you're saying. Okay, so when